But it says like he wanted to do. And wanting to do is before it actually was done. That means if they come before the din, the judgment is carried out, that's when you do you kill him. But if they came after he's already killed, after Reuben was killed, you no longer are allowed to kill the Edim Zomimi. So he says, I killed this Ed Zomim to show that Stukim are wrong. In other words, we caught them before Reuben was killed. And I killed that Ed Zomim to show that Stukim are wrong. Okay, so then Shimon ben Shetach takes and counter oath Klara. He says, you say Ereh ben Nechama, I say Ereh ben Nechama. Ereh ben Nechama, I should see Nechama, which means I shouldn't see Nechama if you did not spill the blood of an innocent individual. Says the Gemara, Amar lo Shimon ben Shetach, Ereh ben Nechama im lo shafachta dam naki. Why? Shehare amru chachamim, because chachamim said another caveat in the halachot of edim zomemim. En edim zomemim neragin at sheyazumu shenehem. That edim zomemim are not killed until both of the edim are nizomim. In other words, in the example we gave, if Levi and Yehuda, who are trying to get Reuben killed, only one of them was nizom. The second set of edim come. They say, "Well, we don't know anything about Yehuda, but Levi cannot have witnessed this because he was with us." So, therefore, the pack of edut, the pack of testimony, is worthless because you don't have two edim. Well, we don't know what Yehuda is saying. Yehuda maybe, well, it can't be that he's saying the truth because he says he was with Levi. We don't know what the story with him is, but we for sure know that Levi was with us. So he could not have seen the murder. So one of the two edim is nizom. Say Chazal, you cannot kill Levi because both of the edim were not nizom. So it says the Gemara, and it's not just the death penalty, but you don't even give them lashes. If they were attempting to get Reuben punished by Malkut, they don't get Malkut until both of them are nizom. Even paying money, you don't have them pay until they both are nizom. So this is what Shimon ben Shetach told Yehuda ben Tabai, and Yehuda ben Tabai was besides himself. Says the Gemara, Miyad kibel alav Yehuda ben Tabai she'eno more halacha ela bifnei Shimon ben Shetach. He immediately accepted upon himself that he's no longer going to paskin a halacha on his own, unless it is through and in front of Shimon ben Shetach. Because this way, if he makes a mistake, an error like this, Shimon ben Shetach is there to correct him. He just killed someone that did not deserve to be killed, it seems like to him, right? Now, by the way, just in parentheses, just pausing for a moment, the Gemara says in Masechet Gitin, Daf Zayin, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not bring takala through the hand of tzaddikim. There is a certain hanhaga of Hashem, certain conduct that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs beneath the surface in the world that Hashem doesn't allow tzaddikim to make a massive mistake, like to takala, to have an avon. The Gemara says even the chamoro shel Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, even the donkey of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, when they put food in front of it that was not taken maaser off of, was tevel, even though that he hadn't eaten for a long time, he wouldn't eat. Even chamoro, even be'emtar shel tzadikim, The Gemara says HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not bring a takala through them. Kolshkins. So what's the pshat? He killed somebody like that over here. That's a big deal. The Tosafot asks this question. You see this, by the way, from the Gemara in Chulin Daf Zayin as well, that the concept that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not bring takala through a tzaddik. The Tosafot's answer throughout Shas is a very famous answer. The Tosafot say, this concept that the Gemara introduces, that Hashem does not let a tzaddik do an avera, is limited to machalot asurot, to not food that's not fully kasher, right? If it's not fully kasher, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not let you eat it. Why? Because the language of Tosafot is a genai gadol. It's very ugly, very bad for a person to ingest machalot asurot. Why is it very bad? Because perhaps it becomes a part of a person. Machalot asurot is a big deal. It becomes part and parcel of a person. It changes who you are. Like the Ramban writes, by the Isur of eating terefa, nevela, by the Isur of eating the animals that don't have a proper nature. Ramban says, if you eat this, you become it. You are what you eat type of thing, but in a literal sense, you become a Baal Midot Ra'ot. We mentioned once that the Pri Hadash of Yechizkiah di Silva, alav shalom, he was a Gadol veGaon, to the degree that he was comfortable even disagreeing with the Rishonim, and in many other Sephardi countries, they accepted his psakim where Maran is not clear. He lived a very short life, but unfortunately, he was 20. He was born in Italy. He was 20 when he came to Yisraeli. He became a Talmud of Maram Galanti, Rabbi Moshe Galanti, who was a student of Maran Shkaruk, and he was the first of Rishonei Tzion. Right? Nowadays, people think Rishonei Tzion is like a political or half-political position. Back in the day, this is a almost 500-year-old title. Rishonei Tzion, these two, all the Chachmei Yisrael, they used to get together and appoint the greatest Talmid Chacham in their midst as the Rishon. He was the first of the chain of Rishonei Tzions. He became the Rebbe of Pri Chadash. Pri Chadash, unfortunately, died in a very, very young age, in his 30s. But Lemaaseh, Pri Chadash writes in the Hakdama to Siman Pedalet, in Yoredeah, Halachot Tolaim, he says, why is it that there are so many bad midot in the generation that we have, he says, back then, 500 years ago? It's because people are not careful in the Isur of Tolaim. Now, they don't check for bugs when they eat and ingest all the greens that they have, or the fruits, whatever it is, that it could be muhzak betolaim, and so on. They don't check it properly, so you end up eating machalot asurot even in a kosher kitchen. Is the only way that machalot asurot crawl in, pun intended, into your kosher kitchen, and that changes a person's midot. So it's a big deal, says the Tosafot. It's a genai gadol for a person, for a tzaddik, to eat machalot asurot, and this is musar askel, because according to the Tosafot, it turns out that eating machalot asurot is a bigger avla, is more ugly than killing someone that would be quote unquote innocent. Now, the Ritva and the Ramban understand this Gemara a little different. They say this is very similar to what happened in the Gemara in Masechet Baba Metzia, Daf Pei Gimel Amud Bet. There, the Gemara says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's son, Rabbi Elazar, who co-authored the Zohar HaKadosh together with Rabbi Shimon, the whole story of Masechet Shabbat Daf Lamed Gimel, of them having to flee the Roman government because they spoke, bravely against them, and having been in cave for 12 years and plus 1 year afterwards, 13 years altogether. And the Gemara says that in Baba Metzia Pegimel, that Rabbi Elazar, however this happened, he became the head of police. The king appointed him to be the head of the police, and his job was to catch ganavim. And they would actually kill them sometimes. It was not like nowadays, democracy and judgment. And so one time, a person, a Yid, a Jew, disgraced him for doing what he was doing, and he got him very upset, and he just had him locked up. He wanted to teach him a lesson. He had him locked up, and when he came down, he was no longer angry, and so on. He comes to let him go, to release him. It's a catch and release type of thing, and he sees that they already killed him. He was hung already. And he's like, oive, he thought that he killed somebody that was innocent. And he was standing under this body, hung body, and he was crying. And people came to him, to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and said, don't worry. It's not that it was a takala, we know that this person and his son, Ba'u al Na'ara Meurasa B'Yom Kippurim. They violated an Eshet Ish, an Na'ara Meurasa, on Yom Kippur. So, maybe not Chayav Mita because of this, but it was Chayav Mita for other things. So the Ramban and the Ritva understand this Gemara also to be the same thing, that this guy was a Rasha. Now, he may not have been deserving to be killed like this way, but he certainly was Chayav Mita in a different way. It's not that the Cheshbon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was miscalculated, but nevertheless, so in other words, it wasn't a takala that happened through his hand, but still he did the wrong thing. In other words, Hashem had it happen in this way, but at the same time, right? When something negative that is wrongdoing through you happened, you made the mistake in halacha, still is not a proper thing. So therefore, he accepted that I'm never going to paskin a halacha unless it's in front of Shimon ben Shetach, right? Now, the Gemara goes on before we come back to the proof. The Gemara goes on to say, Kol yamav shel Yehuda ben Tabah, his entire life, he would go on the kever of this guy that he killed, and he would spread himself on the kever crying. And it was howling and crying loud. The people from outside Beit HaKvarot, they could hear the howling and crying. And people thought, Ben Yoyada, the Ben Ishchai writes that this was at night. Sometimes he would go, and people would not want to go check who it is, but they just heard from outside the kol bechi, the cries from Beit HaKvarot, from the side that this guy was buried. So people thought, they thought that it's the call, the voice of the person that was killed. That the strange voice is coming out from the kever, Amar lahem, but he wanted to show people that he is a Baal Tshuva. Like we talk about Baal Tshuva, this is an under Madrega. This is already another level of being a Baal Tshuva. He wanted people to know that I made a mistake, and I am amidst the process of Tshuva, a lifelong process of Tshuva. And he said, no, it's not him, it's me. And and you'll see, Shemachar Umet, when Yehuda ben Tabai said, when I'm gone, En Kolo Nishma, it's no longer going to be heard, this voice of cry. Amar le Rav Acha bred Rava. So the Gemara says in parentheses, basically, Rav Acha, the son of Rabbi, told him to Rav Ashi, V'dilma Piyus Epais, it's not really a raya that if Yehuda ben Tabai dies and the voice stops, that this was the voice of Yehuda ben Tabai, because maybe either of the two things happened. When he died, his neshama was mefayes. Finally, it was appeased by the death of Yehuda ben Tabai, or he called him to a din up there, or bedina taveh. So either bedilma payus paise, either he appeased him when he passed away, or bedina taveh, or he took him to a din. So says the Gemara, now we brought this whole story to take sides between Rabbi Meir and Rabbanan. Let's not forget, it's an interesting story with a lot of implications. But the point of the fact is that Yehuda ben Tabai said, I'm never going to pass in halacha if it's not in front of Shimon ben Shetach. Which means, prior to that, he felt comfortable passing halacha in front of Shimon ben Shetach. Now, you tell me, says the Gemara, can an Av Betin paskin in the place of a Nasi? Well, if he was the Nasi, so Nasi could paskin without an Av Betin because he's a higher rank, right? So it makes sense that Yehuda ben Tabai was the Nasi, and therefore he, without consulting the Av Betin, he would paskin prior to this. And now it's I'm no longer going to do this. I'm no longer going to paskin without consulting with Shimon ben Shetach. But if you say that he was not the Nasi, rather he was the Av Bedin, he could paskin against the Nasi if he was just the Av Bedin. So Mani, who is the Tana? I Amrat Bishlama Rabbi Meir, if you say it's Rabbi Meir, the Amar Shimon ben Shetach Av Bedin, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai Nasi, then it makes sense. That's why he was paskening comfortably in presence of Shimon ben Shetach. That means when he's in town, not in front of him, without consulting with him, because he's a Nasi, he's a higher rank. Ela yamrad Rabbanan. But if you say that Rabbanan are correct, the Amri Yehuda ben Tabai av Bedin, that they hold Yehuda ben Tabai was av Bedin, was a lower rank, and Shimon ben Shetach is the Nasi, then av Bedin b'fnei Nasi mi more halacha? Since when av Bedin could paskin this type of halacha in front of a Nasi? So why is he accepting upon himself, I'm never going to paskin halacha in front of, unless I discuss it with Shimon ben Shetach? You couldn't have done that anyways. What are you accepting about yourself? That is your halacha. You can't paskin halacha without consulting with the Nasi if you're the Av Bedin and he's the Nasi. So the Gemara says, it seems from the story that Rabbi Meir is correct, that Yehuda ben Tabai indeed was the Nasi, and Shimon ben Shetach was the Av Bedin. Says the Gemara, no. Now, mi more halacha, lo. The Gemara says, no, that's not correct. My kibel alav the kamar le istarufi tafilu istarufi nami lo mistarifna. Gemara says, no. You are correct. A Av Bedin cannot paskin alone without consulting with the Nasi because he's a lower rank. And Yehuda ben Tabai actually was the Av Bedin, Shimon ben Shetach was Nasi. So he was not paskening alone against or without consultation with the Nasi, with Shimon ben Shetach. But that is only when you're paskening on your own. When you kill somebody, how many people do you have to have minimum involved? 23, right? You have to have a Bedin of 23. So to be part of the Bedin of 23 to get somebody killed, that is not Asur. If the Av Bedin wants to be a part of the Bedin Shel Dinei Nefashot and paskin that someone is Chayav Mita or not Chayav Mita, he could do that. Because it's the Bedin of 23. It's not him paskening, it's the Bedin paskening. And that is what he accepted upon himself. He said, I'm not even going to be mistaref, to be a part of a Bedin. Anything I'm going to paskin, even if it's going to be as a function of a larger Bedin, I'm not going to paskin the final Pesach unless I run it by Shimon ben Shetach. That's the Kabbalah that he accepted upon himself. But says the Gemara, really Rabbanan are correct that Shimon ben Shetach was the Nasi and Yehuda ben Tabai was the Av Bedin.
What's the halacha with Edin Zumamim? Is it like Shimon ben Shetach or is it like Yehuda ben Tabai?
The Gemara in Makot discusses this, and the halacha is like Shimon ben Shetach said. Says the Gemara, Yatza Menachem v'nichnas Shammai. Now, in presenting the Zukot, the Mishnah said about Hillel that everyone knows Hillel v'Shammai, right? Machlokes Hillel v'Shammai, but Hillel v'Shammai, everyone knows that. But the history of it didn't start from Shammai. The history started that Hillel's counterpart was a different person called Menachem, right? And the Mishnah has the most strange of languages. It says that Hillel u'Menachem lo nechleku. There was no machloket between Hillel and his counterpart Menachem. But what happened is, Yatza Menachem nichnas Shammai. Menachem went out and Shammai came in. Very peculiar language. So the Gemara says, what do you mean Yatza Menachem? Where did he go? 2 dots by the Gemara. Yatza Menachem nichnas Shammai. Lehechan Yatza. Where did he go out to? And says the Gemara, Abaye Amar, Yatza letarbut ra'ah. He went off the path, which is very not appropriate necessarily, but very interesting that we have this in the same daf with Elisha Acher, Elisha ben Avuya, that he also went off the path. So Abaye said he went off the path, and therefore he was no longer fit for the job. And Rabbi says no, Yatza le'avodat hamelech. He did not go off the path of Shalom. He went to work for the Avodat HaMelech, for the king. Tanya Namiach, again, we mentioned before, just a few minutes ago, that sometimes this happened to be imposed upon one other time the Chachamim, just like we had the story of Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, the Sar Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that was basically appointed directly by the king to be the head of police. So you can't say no to that, right? Like the Gemara there says, Hurmana de Malkau is the command of the king, and he wasn't the only one. The Gemara later on, in that same place in Pei Gimel, in Masechet Bava Metzia, says that the same thing happened also to Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yossi, these are Gedolei Tanaim. These are the greatest names in the list of Tanaim. He was appointed by the king to do the same thing. So what do? So it says Gemara, that's what Yatzala Avodat HaMelech. He basically had to be drafted to the king's army or to the king's staff, and he didn't go alone. 80 pairs of Talmidim, they went off with him, Levushin, Srikin. They were wearing fancy, nice garments, the Srikon. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Shimon bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Leolam al tehe shvut kala beinecha. You should never be mezalzel to a Rabbanan. You should never disgrace and look down upon a mitzvah Rabbanan and say, it's just the Rabbanan, right? Because think about it. The whole reason that smicha would be asur on Yom Tov is because of the Rabbanan. It's asur to be mishtamesh bebal chai. You can't use an animal. You can't ride a horse. You can't ride a donkey. You can use them for personal purposes. It's considered muktzeh. And says the Gemara, and look at how much machloket is around. This is the first machloket. There's so much commotion is around this, built in. All of the generations, 5 generations of Tanaim are still wrapping their head around this one the Rabbanan. So don't think that the Rabbanans are just easy things to pass on. So says the Gemara, Pshita. Gemara says, of course. What do you mean? Since when the Rabbanan is not important, that you should need a Gemara to say that the Rabbanan is important. Well, the Gemara also says the Rabbanan is more important than the Deoraita, right? It's more important than Yeinah Shel Torah. Divrei Chachamim is more important than Yeinah Shel Torah. By the way, why is it like that? And the Maral tries to explain this in the first chapter of his Sefer Ber HaGolah, during which he explains the questions that people have on Divrei Chachamim, and he explains this in a fundamental way. Why Divrei Chachamim is more important than Divrei Torah? Of course, the severity of Divrei Torah is more important. When you have Safek the Oraita is the Chumrah, Safek the Rabbanan is the Kula. We know that already. But in perspective of keeping Yiddishkeit, the Divrei Chachamim is more important because the authority of Sanhedrin, authority of Bedin, is the only thing that keeps the Torah going. And therefore, if you don't have that part of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the whole thing is going to fall and crumble. And therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu cares more about violation of the Rabbanan than even sometimes violation of a Torah. So that's something very important. And the Gemara says, Pshita, that's Pashut. What do you want to say? The Gemara says, no. Correct, that's Pashut. Shavut mitzvah ifterichale. The reason that's important to say this is because this is Shavut mitzvah. It's not a regular Shavut. It's not a regular Drabanan, but it's a Drabanan that otherwise would have been a mitzvah. In other words, when you bring a korban, it's a mitzvah to do simicha. Now the question is, now when you have a tug of war between a mitzvah and otherwise an averad Rabbanan, in other words, if this was not a mitzvah, it would be a averad Rabbanan. Generally speaking, you can't be mishtamesh bebehema on Yom Tov. You can't use a behema on Yom Tov. But here, you're putting all your weight on this animal, as we're going to see. So that's normally the way the mitzvah of smicha happens. But here, there is a competition between this mitzvah, a tug of war between the mitzvah and the normally speaking would be avera to do that on if it was not a korban. So which one wins? That's the question. The reason that there's this whole commotion about it is like, do you say, well, it's avera d'Rabbanan to be mishtamesh bema, but you have the mitzvah of smicha, so you should trump the avera d'Rabbanan. Or you say, no, because it's avera d'Rabbanan, it trumps the mitzvah of smicha, and we don't do it on Yom Tov. Says the Gemara, Shevut mitzvah is terichale. The Gemara says, Haname pshita. Says that also is pashut. Why is that not pashut? Why is it pashut? Le'afuke miman de amar besmicha gufa pliki. Kamash malan beshevut hu de pliki. The Gemara says no. The machloket over here is there would be an understanding that smicha itself would be a machloket. And the Gemara is coming to teach us that no, it is only because it's a avera d'Rabbanan. Otherwise, therefore, it's the machloket tanaim of the 5 pairs of tanaim, whether or not you do that on Yom Tov. It's not an essential machloket about the mitzvah of smicha by itself. So says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Bar Chama, Shemamina, we learn 2 things from this. Now, the Gemara is going to go through those 2 things one by one. Rabbi Bar Chama says, you learn from this, Shemamina, you see, smicha bekol kocho ba'inan. That when you do a smicha on the korban, when you put your hand to do smicha on a korban, you need to press down bekol kocho with all your might. So the Gemara, how do you know? Because if you say that you could just put your hands on the animal and not press bekol kocho, my ka'abid lispoch. Gemara says, what's the problem? He doesn't do any avera by putting his hand on the animal's head. You're not being mishtamesh bebema, and that does not enter the isur d'Rabbanan of using an animal on Yom Tov. So you could make everyone happy. Do the smicha, and you're not violating the Rabbanan. So you see from here that the mitzvah of smicha is bekol kocho. It has to be with all of his power. Says the Gemara, Meitvem, they asked in the Beit Midrash, Daber al bnei Yisrael v'samach, that the pasuk reads in a way that indicates that only bnei Yisrael, only the male of Klal Yisrael will do smicha, but not the female. Daber al bnei Yisrael, and then follows v'samach. Daber al bnei Yisrael v'amata alehem adam ki akriv mikem korban la'Hashem min ha'behema min ha'bakar min ha'son takrivu et korbanchem. This is mamash the second pasuk of Sefer Vayikra. And then 2 psukim later it says v'samach yado al rosh ha'olah v'nirtzah. So you see that it's bnei Yisrael that would do semicha. Bnei Yisrael somchin ve'en benot Yisrael somchot. Only male do it, not female. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Ishmael omrim, benot Yisrael somchot rashut. They say no. Benot Yisrael could also do it. They don't have to do it, but they could do it as a rashut. If they want, they could do it. So says the Gemara. Now he brings the Gemara is going to bring a story also. We're out of time now, but the point that the Gemara is going to discuss is if it's only reshut, if it's only allowed, but it's not a mitzvah, how in the world, if you have to do bekol kocho, if you have to really press hard, how in the world do you have this concept that on Yom Tov you could do semicha bekol kocho when you don't have to do semicha? If you're a woman, you ask the rabbi, he says, do I have to do semicha? You don't have to, but you could do it. How do you do semicha? You push hard on Yom Tov, that's considered being mishtamesh bebema. So how in the world is it mutar to violate an isur on Yom Tov when you don't even have to do it as a mitzvah? It's just an optional thing. So the Gemara wants to suggest based on that maybe it's not bekol kocho. Maybe it's not something that you have to do with all of your might, because otherwise we're going to be stuck. How in the world women would do it when they don't have to do it as an obligation? They do it as a reshut, as an option, and it will be a violation of Yom Tov. That's a fascinating piece that we're going to B'ezrat Hashem continue in the days to come.